I'm Jonathan Goell. This show is about light. Light, above all, is what makes photography possible. In other shows, I discussed light in terms of how to control it, how to use your aperture and the shutter speed controls on your camera to achieve a good exposure. But light can do so much more than just expose film. Its mere presence in some particular way might be the reason why you'd want to take a certain photograph. Light, after all, can be used creatively. Let me show you what I mean. This photograph was made by Sam Abel, who sometimes works for National Geographic magazine. And it's taken when the light was sort of overcast and very blue overall, except for a thin sliver of yellow intense light coming from the horizon area, coming our way. This light is caught in the clouds somewhat, which reflects in the water down below. The water is glassily reflective, and the rock in it, up close, is reflected in such a way that it looks like it's suspended in thin blue space. It's a very effective picture, and it's the light and the color of the light which really makes it an interesting photograph. Now, light is a form of radiant energy, and it affects nearly everything it touches in one way or another. And unless a light source is a part of your photograph, most of the photographs you're going to take will be from light with light that reflects from your subject. This picture was made in New York City on an early morning, about 7 o'clock, when I was woken by sun streaming in through the window. I looked out to see what was going on and noticed on the roof below me this incredible effect of the sun glancing off of the metal parapets on this lower building. It was still dark enough outside so that everything else was very dark and black except for these radiantly lit roofs. And I got very excited, ran and got my camera, took a picture of it, and moments later the entire effect disappeared and it was just another roof. It was the light coming off at such an angle that made this the picture that it was. Noticing this quality of light was this first simple step towards getting this photograph. Now, the sources of light can be many. This light can come from the sun, it can come from the sun but through overcast clouds, it can come from lightning, light can come from electric lights, from candles, from campfires, from any number of sources, but light has to be there. In a photograph like this, there are two sources of light present. Light coming in through the windows, and also light coming from the chandeliers above and the small chandeliers attached to the wall. Very glittering quality. In addition, there is light reflecting from the mirrors on the sidewalls and from the very shiny floor below. All of this adding to the quality of, well, one would get the feeling that the quality of light was really the subject in this particular picture. Now, there's nearly always enough light to take a picture, but what about the quality of that light? Many subjects will take on an entirely different appearance as the light falling across it changes its character or changes its quality. Come on over here while I show you some slides. This picture is taken on an overcast day of just a wall, a church wall. The church was in partial ruin and under construction. I went back the following day, 7:30 in the morning, and what do you think I found? This. Boy, it's incredible. All of a sudden, these slashing shadows coming across from the buttresses, the windows, the stones are standing out, the texture and color of the stone is much warmer, and well, this is an early morning light, has a particularly nice quality. I came back later on at 12:30. By this time the light had cooled off slightly but was very high in the sky, so the sun now caught the shadow now projected the shadow of a tree against this wall. I then left and came back a little bit later on, and the light had changed, moved somewhat again. This is 2:30 in the afternoon. I actually like the other effect better, but you can see that this wall is like a screen of changing effects. I then left and came back at 5:30. The wall was in total shadow, so I went across to the front of the building and noticed the setting sun. Took a quick picture of the setting sun coming through the trees, then spun on my heel and noticed how beautiful the quality of that setting sun made the church. Here is a ruin of a church made really grand and eloquent by the color of a sunset. Most people like to photograph sunsets themselves, but try someday turning around and seeing what the sunset itself is illuminating, some other subject. I always first notice a particular subject, and then I immediately notice the quality of light that that subject is in. These pictures were made with light that radiated upon and then reflected from a regular subject. But have you ever noticed how beautiful light looks when it comes through things? A stained glass window comes to mind. I also like sometimes looking at light, say candlelight, that comes through a glass of wine when I hold it up. Light coming through things can be very, very pretty indeed. This picture is of a window, of course, but the textures and shapes on it are formed by snow collecting on the window screen beyond the window during a very intense snowstorm. I liked it. I took a picture of it. These kinds of things are always fun to do, but this type of scene is also very tricky to photograph because it's tricky and hard sometimes to get the right exposure. Now, a light meter can really be your best friend in such a situation, but you can't, in this case, use the reading you get directly from the meter. If I had taken my meter and put it up against the glass and gotten a reading, the result would have come back not light, like snow is, as you'd expect it to see, but dark, murky, and muddy. Setting your camera to properly expose translucent subjects like this, very bright subjects, requires that you reinterpret the meter reading, not use the one that the meter suggests. Here's why. Remember, most exposure meters are manufactured to assume that all of the scenes and subjects that you point it to will be a broad mix of not just light tones like this, but light tones, middle tones, and very dark tones. And the light cell here averages all of those tones, all of those light values, all of those reflectances into a straight middle gray. The meter cannot tell them apart. And that's why, of course, most meters are called averaging meters. Therefore, realizing this, this is what I did. I took my meter and I went right up to the window and I took a direct reading through the glass like this. Looked at my meter and the exposure recommended was f11 at 1/60th of a second. Fine. Can't use it. In order to render the snow as a light gray and white tones that I remember the snow to be, I opened up 2 stops on my camera so that the new setting was not f11 but f5.6 at a 60th of a second. I added 2 stops of light. I deliberately overexposed not the subject but the recommended meter reading. I reinterpreted that reading to make the subject look correctly light. Now, of course, most meters will do a very good job. I mean, they're built to, but as soon as you get into a situation like this where the subject is predominantly very light, the meter is going to be fooled, and you're not going to get the result that you want. So here's some tips on how to prevent the fooling of the meter and the messing up of the photograph. Whenever you're reading something that's very light, or perhaps as a light source, such as my window is, take the reading as close to the subject as you can get. Get right up to it, and then whatever the meter says, open up 2 more stops on your camera from that suggested reading. Then stand back, compose your picture, and take it. And it will work. The picture will come out. Give it a try. Now, what else does light do? Well, beautiful and unusual things can happen when light reflects from things, when light reflects from, say, mirror-like surfaces. This slide was very simply made against a red building that had a door, a glass door in it, which was reflecting a white building across the way. Very simple direct picture, but it was the reflection that made it interesting. It winds up being kind of a study of white against red. In this photograph, I was hard-pressed against a pane of glass at a barber shop, and I was looking down the street, and I liked the symmetry of the trees and the pole, and all of a sudden 2 people came down the street looking like 4, and before they got too close to me, I made the picture. It's the glass that, of course, made this possible. I like taking pictures that don't often have an easy explanation. In this case, I was looking in through the window of a store where the late afternoon sun was casting shadows from its door onto the rug, and all of a sudden, someone walked behind me, and I snapped the picture. Well, this sort of double quality, the superimposition of an outside form and inside form that usually have no relation to each other, are what make pictures like this interesting, and it's the reflection ability that, of course, is what I try to exploit. This is a rather straightforward picture, a simple compound image. aiming my camera into an antique store that had a chair in it. I positioned myself until I superimposed over the chair a taxi cab parked right in front of the store. Very straightforward, but they're easy to do and it's kind of fun. Sometimes glass will have a distorting quality, and in this case, I moved around looking in the window until I was able to make the building behind the Volkswagen look just like the car, curved. Sometimes you can even get double and triple reflections, as in this case, standing in a store that had both glass and mirrors in it, photographed until I moved around until I got the position I want and took the picture. There's another walking man. I always like to photograph walking figures in pictures. Reflections. There's something else you can do with things that reflect. It's very simple and straightforward. You can photograph yourself. This photograph was simply made by setting up my camera and tripod in front of a full-length mirror. I got dressed up for the occasion, as you can see. Self-portraits are a lot of fun. That, by the way, is a 40-year-old camera on that tripod, a camera I use quite a bit. Let me give you a tip about shooting subjects which basically are reflections. Firstly, focus on the subject that is reflected in the mirror, not the surface of the mirror, the frame, but the subject that you see in it. And secondly, when you're determining your exposure, also aim your meter or your camera's meter at the subject that you see, and then to account for the flare of mirrors, which sometimes inflates a meter reading, open up one stop from what the meter suggests. Now, so far, most of the pictures that I've shown you have been those where the light was really just right for the subjects that they were illuminated by. What about situations where that isn't true? Well, how many times have you noticed something like this? Sometimes the light can be just too harsh and too strong for some subjects. In this case, my friend Bonnie was trying hard to smile against the glaring afternoon sun in her eyes, but she was squinting. Whenever you're photographing someone in direct sun and you see them squinting, there's a message buried deeply there somewhere for you. Move. Well, Bonnie and I switched places so that the sun was now coming across her shoulder instead of mine. It lit up her hair. It changed the entire quality of the picture. Working against the sun like this can produce beautiful kinds of portraits, but the best thing about it, of course, is now that Bonnie's face is in the shade, she's not squinting anymore. Well, of course, because she's in the shade, I had to change the camera controls to get a better exposure. And it really is sometimes kind of hard and a little tricky. You have to take extra care when you're taking exposure readings against the light. This is how it was done in this case. I took a hand meter such as this, and I walked right up to Bonnie. You can use either a hand meter, of course, or the meter built into the camera, but in any case, get as close as you can to the subject. I got very close to Bonnie, and I took an exposure reading off the palm of my hand like this. I held my palm up at the same angle as her face. Now, if her face happens to be the same tone as the palm, you can read the face directly. If it's convenient, you can also use the palm. I like to do that. In any case, I took the reading from my palm, and the meter said 125th of a second at f5.6. And I opened up from that reading to expose at f4. Now, if my palm had happened to be a middle gray, which it's not, I could have taken the reading of the palm and used it directly. The meters are calibrated to work with straight middle gray subjects. But the average palm tends to be about one stop lighter than a middle gray, so I opened up the stop. Now remember, in many cases you really can get very consistent, good exposures of most subjects by using this meter reading off the palm plus one stop system. And it also works very well if you cannot get close to the subject. For example, if you were photographing, in this case, Bonnie from a distance, or even a landscape that happened to be backlit by the sun coming towards you, hold your hand out parallel to the face if you can, but in any case, hold it out and take a reading directly from the palm, being careful not to let any light from the direct light hit the meter cell, of course. Take the reading from the palm and open up one stop. This works, of course, if both you and the subject happen to be bathed in the same overall quality of light. Now, in this particular photograph, I used a lens shade on the camera. They are also called sunshades, and here's one on this one. It's basically a sun shading device, and it does the same thing to a lens that your hand does when you put it over your eyes to shield yourself from too much light, like so. it basically prevents light from outside the subject area from reaching the film or getting into the lens. When that happens, you often get something called flare. You might see it as light spots on the final prints or slides. You might see it as an overall loss of contrast, and sometimes as an overall loss of crispness in the final picture. That's called extraneous light, and the sunshade can help keep it out. Now, many experienced photographers like to keep the sunshade on the camera permanently. After all, you don't want to have to suddenly reach for it if you don't have time when you need it. But it also has a second use, and that is protecting the lens, sometimes from shock. You might be getting out of a car and bang the lens suddenly against the door of the car. If the camera were hanging around your neck, the sunshade will help protect it. In any case, if you do want to employ flare in your pictures, and that's a legitimate source of light, use of light, if there's something with it you want to do, you can always just take the lens shade off and then take your picture. Now, sometimes when you're out photographing, you have to take the light as it comes. It might be coming from a particular direction. You might not be able to change places with your subject. You might not be able to alter the light in any way, and you have to live with it as it comes. But there are some ways that you can alter the way that light will look in your final subject. Now, in our subject here in the studio, we have a situation where the light is coming very strongly from one side. You might get this effect, for example, if you were photographing someone by a window and they were lit by very strong light coming in from the side of the window. One side would be very light, the other side would be very dark. You might also encounter it in strong sunlight. The meter reading off your palm, like this, in such a situation, might get you a reasonably good exposure reading, but because the contrast of the light is so strong, one side so light, one side so dark, you might not get the best of all possible readings. There really is a much better way, and it's called the averaging system. You measure the light side, then you measure the dark side separately, and then set the meter in between those two. Now I'll do it. I'll measure the bright side, and I get a suggested reading of a 15th of a second, of f45 at a 15th of a second. Now, I can't use that exposure. That's just the bright side I'm reading. Then I go over to the shadow side and I read that. And I get a much lower reading of f8 at a 15th of a second. I want to set my camera for an exposure more or less midway between those two for this, and I will choose f16 as my exposure. Set the lens for f16, cock the lens, pull out the film, and take the picture. Now, when you're doing averaging readings, it's a good idea to be very careful when you're reading the shadow side especially, not to let the main light source affect the meter reading, so you might want to shade the meter slightly. At the same time, you don't want to inadvertently cast shadows against that area that you're measuring too. Let's see what our first picture looks like. Not bad for first try. It's not a bad exposure, it's not a bad picture, but it's somewhat contrasty. That is, all of the shadow parts are all very, very dark, and the light parts are all very light. Now, if the difference in a photograph in strong light is more than, say, about 4 stops between the high reading and the low reading, you're going to get a very contrasty result like this. You might like that result, but if you don't, you can add light yourself into the shadows by using a reflector. Now, some people might want to use a white card like this. What you would do is you'd set it up here and try and redirect some light, you can see the difference, some light from the direct light source into the shadows. But if you really want a lot more light than that, you can take some aluminum foil such as this and first crumple it up and put it on the cardboard. Now, I like to have not the shiny side facing the subject, but the dull side of the aluminum foil, because the shiny side projects too many little scintillating spots of light, which you might not like. Of course, if you do like it, you use it. But I would rather have the dull side. Now, this time when I set it up, I'll get much more light thrown into the shadow side. Watch the difference. Wow, there it is. The idea is to catch the main light and aim it into the shadows like that. If that doesn't fall over, we'll take our picture. Now, I'll take the new readings of the light. The original side, of course, was f45 at a 15th. But now I'm going to read the shadow side. And the shadow side is now 2 stops lighter. Whereas before it read f8, it now reads f16. And setting the aperture more or less midway between the two, I'm going to use about f22, a little over f22. Now let's take that picture again. Okay. There are other things you can use, by the way, for reflectors. Lots of people just pick up a piece of newspaper like this and hold it against the shadowed side. And while the newspaper doesn't add a tremendous amount of light, still it can help. And you might want to just, in some cases, tape a reflector to a chair or to a light or something like that and hold it up. You can hold it up yourself, or in some cases have someone hold it for you. Let's see what this next picture looks like. This is a little different now. The contrast is much lower. Now, the light parts of the picture are not only a little darker so that there's plenty of separation between, say, the ear and the hand, but the shadows are also a little bit lighter. Just enough so that you can see the other side of the nose against the shadows, or the end of the eyepiece here against the background. That's a fairly reasonable exposure. Now, I'm not satisfied with that. I feel like I want to do a bit more and change the exposures. Why would I want to do that? Very simple. The camera controls are creative controls. You can use them to change the appearance of your subject. By changing the exposure, you can deliberately make a subject lighter or darker as you want to see it. Now, what do you think would happen if I added a couple of stops of light to the original exposure? Well, let's see. The basic exposure was f22. I think I'm going to close it. I'm going to open it up to f11. It's a lot of extra light. Steady the camera. Take the picture. And push the slide in again. Now, when you're taking pictures like this on a tripod, camera on a tripod, it's really a very good idea to let the tripod settle down a little bit after you've wound it, worked with the film, before you take the shot. Otherwise, the picture is going to be very blurry in a way that you don't want. Let's see what our result looks like. Oh, very nice. The whole picture is very light, very airy. Most of the highlight details are gone, but that's okay. This is called a high-key result, and if you wanted this result, overexposing would be the correct thing to do to get it. Now, what if I wanted to make a picture that was instead very dark, very dramatic, romantic, sort of moody and deep? I would add less light, underexpose it somewhat, darken the picture. Watch. The last exposure was made around f11. I'm now going to make this one at just over f32. Set the shutter, pull out the film, steady the camera, bingo. Okay. You may be wondering what kind of camera I'm in fact using here. This is a 4x5-inch view camera, almost always used on tripods. They're made for taking very clear pictures, large negative, and I'm using a Polaroid adapter to accommodate this particular kind of instant film. Let's see what kind of a result we have. Real difference. Very dark photograph. Only the highlights are showing, and even they are pretty dark by comparison to the other pictures. This is called a low-key result, a dark photograph. Same subject, exactly the same lighting, 3 different treatments. How did I get it? I pre-visualized a certain result that I wanted to see, and I set the exposure accordingly to get that final result. It's called pre-visualizing a final photograph. I achieved it with the camera controls. That's what controlling the quality of light is all about in photography. In a later show, I'll talk to you a bit about the control of artificial light, flash, and things like that. But for now, I want to show you a few remaining photographs which I think really exemplify a very nice use of light in photography. This picture is by Joel Meyerowitz, and he normally uses 35mm film, but for this he used a view camera on a tripod, and I think what he was after was the very nice glow of light coming in from the door, bouncing off the red couch, casting its glow against the ceiling up here. The picture is about light, and contrasting with all the softness is this very beautiful, severe, hard edge of white of the light glancing off of the enamel paint. This picture really is about light. Well, this photograph is by Ansel Adams of a mission, Spanish mission, I think, in the Southwest, and it's a photograph of, well, it's sort of a study of a play of light and dark. The arches, the arabesques of all the curves, caught in a really beautiful way. He waited until the right time of day so the light was coming at just a particular angle, carefully made the exposure, and got a beautiful, beautiful photograph as a result. This picture is by George Krauss. George Krauss makes pictures which really ask more questions than they answer. In this case, he used the he photographed a woman walking along the street who was casting a shadow in the late afternoon light. The shape of the shadow is a very sinister and strange shadow, and it's more or less up to us to figure out what such a picture means. But it's the quality of light, again, which is the subject in that picture. This photograph was made by Edward Steichen of the Brooklyn Bridge in 1903. It's made at night on a misty, foggy night, and only the lights on the bridge and under it here are illuminating the scene. And if it weren't for the mistiness of the atmosphere catching the light and softening the effect as it does, it would be an entirely different, hard-edged kind of a picture. But it's a soft and romantic picture, and it's the quality of light that gives it that certain look. His job, of course, was to notice that quality of light, realize that it would make a fine photograph, and take the picture. Well, go out, have fun with your cameras. Above all, notice the quality of light as it falls upon the subjects you're shooting. Can't take a picture with a meter. Have a good time. See you next time.